65,000 years. Say that number slowly. Let it sit in your mind for a moment, because your brain is not built to hold it. No human brain is. We evolved to understand seasons, generations, maybe a few centuries if we push it. But 65,000 years is not a number your intuition can grasp. It is a chasm. 65,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had barely left Africa. Europe was empty of modern humans. The Neanderthals were still the dominant hominins from the Atlantic coast to the Altai Mountains. The Americas were uninhabited. The ice sheets were still building toward their maximum. The world was a different planet. And on the northern edge of a continent that would not be called Australia for another 64,970 years, someone walked into a sandstone rock shelter, sat down, and started making tools. They ground the edge of an axe against stone until it was sharp. They crushed ochre and mixed it into pigment. They lit a fire. They stayed, and somebody, generation after generation after generation after generation, kept coming back for 65,000 years. This is the story of Madjedbebe, a rock shelter in the sandstone escarpments of what is now Arnhem Land in Australia's Northern Territory. It is not a palace, not a pyramid, not a monument. It is a shallow overhang and a cliff face, maybe 15 meters wide, open to the wind, with a floor of sandy sediment that built up centimeter by centimeter over millennia, so deep that the bottom layers predate every other known site of human habitation on the Australian continent. And it did not just push back the date of Australian settlement, it broke the clock. It forced archaeologists to redraw the map of human migration out of Africa. It challenged the assumption that technological complexity requires dense populations, writing, agriculture, cities. Because the people who lived at Madjedbebe 65,000 years ago were not doing simple things. They were doing things that in other parts of the world would not appear for tens of thousands of years. This is the story of those people, and I am going to tell it through the eyes of one of them. His name, the name I am giving him because no oral tradition survives that far and no writing existed, is Kael. He is a toolmaker. He lives at Madjedbebe during a period of climatic stress, when the monsoon patterns are shifting and the landscape is changing around him. He does not know he is making history. He does not know that the axe he is grinding will sit in the earth for 65 millennia until a team of archaeologists pulls it out and stares at it in disbelief. He just knows the edge needs to be sharp. The pigment needs to be ground. The fire needs to last the night. Let us go back. The escarpment rises from the lowland floodplain like a wall. If you've never seen the Arnhem Land plateau, it is hard to convey the scale. Sandstone, ancient, Proterozoic, more than 1 billion years old, eroded into towers, overhangs, gorges and shelves. During the wet season, waterfalls pour over the edges. During the dry, the rock bakes pale gold under a sky so wide it swallows you. Madjedbebe sits at the base of this escarpment, near what is now the Jabiluka mineral lease, inside the traditional country of the Mara people. The shelter faces northwest. It catches the afternoon shade. The floor is deep sand, 3 meters of it, layered with ash, stone flakes, ochre, ground seeds, and the residue of 65,000 years of human presence. Kael's world, 65,000 years ago, looks nothing like modern Arnhem Land. The sea level is lower, much lower. The coastline is hundreds of kilometers to the north. What is now the Arafura Sea is dry land, a broad savanna plain connecting Australia to New Guinea in a single landmass geologists call Sahul. The climate is cooler, but not cold. The monsoon is active, dumping rain seasonally. The escarpment is a reliable water source, with springs seeping from the rock and pools collecting in the gorges below. The vegetation is a mosaic, open woodland on the plains, monsoon vine forest in the sheltered gorges, pandanus and paperbark along the creeks. Megafauna still roam. Diprotodon, the largest marsupial ever, 2.5 tons of it. Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, giant flightless birds, enormous monitor lizards. The ecology is rich, complex, and unlike anything anywhere else on Earth. Kael is part of a small group, maybe 15, 20 people. They are mobile. They do not live at Madjedbebe permanently. They move through the landscape on a seasonal round, following water, following food, following the rhythms of a world they understand intimately. But Madjedbebe is a node, a place they return to, a shelter during storms, a workshop, a gathering point, a place where pigment is ground and ceremony is conducted and tools are made and stories are told. And I need to stop here and talk about those tools, because they are the reason the world sat up and paid attention. In 2017, a team led by archaeologist Chris Clarkson of the University of Queensland published a landmark paper in the journal Nature. The paper reported the results of new excavations at Madjedbebe, previously known as Malakunanja II, using optically stimulated luminescence dating on sediment samples from the deepest cultural layers. The dates came back at 65,000 years before present, with some artifacts potentially reaching back as far as 80,000 years. This was not a marginal extension. The previous consensus for the earliest human arrival in Australia was around 47,000 to 50,000 years. Clarkson's team pushed it back by at least 15,000 years. The paper documented more than 11,000 artifacts from the oldest layers alone. These included edge-ground hatchet heads, the oldest ground-edge axes found anywhere in the world. They included grinding stones with traces of seed processing. They included lumps of ochre and reflective mica that had been ground into pigment. They included stone points worked with a sophistication that suggested established, transmitted technological traditions. This was not a campsite of people barely surviving. This was a workshop of people who had been innovating for a long time before they even arrived. Kael does not know any of this language. He does not think in terms of technological traditions or behavioral modernity or the out-of-Africa dispersal. He thinks in terms of the stone in front of him. The hatchet is a piece of local sandstone, carefully selected for its grain. He has been working it for 2 days. The first day, he roughed the shape with direct percussion, striking flakes off with a hammerstone to get the basic form, a teardrop, flat on one side, convex on the other, with a cutting edge at the wide end. The second day, he began the grinding. This is the part that takes patience. He holds the axe head against a flat slab of sandstone, a grinding stone worn into a shallow groove by years of use, and pushes it back and forth, with the weight of his shoulders behind it. The grit of the sandstone abrades the edge, smoothing it, thinning it, sharpening it into something that will bite into wood cleanly instead of crushing it. Grinding a stone edge is not obvious. If you have never done it, you might assume that any sharp edge on a rock is the same as any other. It is not. A flaked edge, made by striking flakes off, is irregular, serrated at a micro level, prone to chipping. It works well for cutting through meat and hide, but for chopping wood, for felling a small tree, for shaping a pole, for hollowing out a vessel, a ground edge is vastly superior. It is smoother, more durable, less likely to bind in the cut. It is the difference between a serrated bread knife and a finely honed felling axe. And Kael is making this tool 65,000 years ago. In Europe, ground-edge tools do not appear until the Neolithic, roughly 10,000 years ago. Kael's people are 55,000 years ahead of Europe on this one technology. Let that number land. He does not grind the edge for the pleasure of innovation. He grinds it because the landscape demands it. The escarpment woodland is dense with trees that have hard, fibrous bark, eucalypts, paperbarks, acacias. To process these trees, to cut footholds for climbing, to chop branches for shelter frames, to strip bark for containers, to access the grubs and honey inside trunks, you need an edge that does not shatter on the third stroke. The ground edge axe is a solution to a specific ecological problem. It is Australian, it is local, it is brilliant. Kael finishes the grinding as the sun drops toward the escarpment rim. He tests the edge with his thumb. It catches the skin cleanly. Good. He sets the hatchet head aside. Tomorrow, he will haft it, lash it to a wooden handle with fibre cord and plant resin. Tonight, there is other work. His cousin, I will call her Murray, is grinding ochre. She has a flat stone in her lap, stained deep red from years of use, and she is crushing a lump of iron oxide-rich rock against it with a smooth river cobble. The powder collects in the hollow of the grinding stone, fine as flour, vivid as blood. She adds a few drops of water from a bark container, mixes it with her fingers. The paste thickens into something that can be applied to skin, to rock, to anything that needs marking. Ochre use at Madjedbebe goes back to the oldest layers. 65,000 years ago, people here were processing pigment, not just red ochre. They were also grinding reflective minerals, including mica, which produces a glittering, light-catching surface. Think about that for a moment. Reflective pigment, 65,000 years ago. This is not food. This is not shelter. This is not survival in the immediate caloric sense.
This is symbolic behaviour, the use of materials to create visual effect, to communicate identity, to mark the body or objects or places with meaning that goes beyond the functional. In the debate about what defines behavioural modernity, the suite of cognitive capacities that makes Homo sapiens different from every other hominin, symbolic behaviour is the key indicator. The ability to use symbols, to invest objects and actions with meaning that is shared and transmitted culturally, is considered the hallmark of the modern human mind. And the people at Madjedbebe were doing it from the very beginning of their time on this continent. Mari's ochre is not decoration in the way we might trivially understand it. It is serious. The grinding of pigment is labour. The selection of specific colours and minerals, red, yellow, white, glittering mica, is deliberate.
The contexts in which the pigment is used are culturally determined, passed down, embedded in a system of knowledge that connects the physical world to a system of meaning. You do not grind reflective pigment on a stone slab in a rock shelter because you are bored. You do it because it matters, because the ceremony requires it, because the body must be marked before the dance, because the shelter wall must be painted, because the dead must be honored. We do not know the specific ceremonies of people 65,000 years ago. No oral tradition reaches that far in recoverable detail. But the material evidence, the ochre, the mica, the grinding stones, the sheer quantity of pigment in the oldest layers, tells us unambiguously that symbolic life was present from the start. Kael watches Mari work. The firelight catches the mica dust on her hands, and for a moment her fingers glitter. He has seen this his entire life. It is not remarkable to him. It is as ordinary as breathing. But I want to hold this image. Firelight, glittering hands, a rock shelter, 65,000 years ago. Because this image, this exact image, is one of the oldest pictures we can reconstruct of human symbolic life on this continent. And it is not primitive. It is not simple. It is a person engaged in the same fundamental human act that would later produce cave paintings, temple frescoes, illuminated manuscripts, and cathedral windows. The medium changes, the impulse does not. Night falls over the escarpment. The fire is the center of everything. Kael feeds it with strips of paper bark. It flares bright, then settles to coals. The smoke rises straight up in the still air, hits the underside of the rock overhang, and spreads out across the ceiling. Over thousands of years, this smoke will stain the rock black, and that soot layer will become one of the stratigraphic markers archaeologists use to date the occupation. Around the fire, the group is small, 3 family units maybe, children asleep on bark mats, 2 older men repairing a fishing net made of twisted fiber.
Mary, still grinding ochre. A woman Kael's mother's age, chewing the end of a stick to soften it, a tool for extracting insects from bark crevices. The conversation, and there is conversation because these are anatomically modern humans with the same vocal apparatus and the same neurological capacity for language as any person alive today, the conversation is quiet, intermittent, the way firelight conversations tend to be. Someone mentions the water hole to the east. It is getting low. The wet season is late this year. This is not a throwaway detail. The timing of the monsoon is everything. In Arnhem Land, the annual cycle divides into a long dry and a torrential wet. The wet fills the rivers, floods the plains, drives fish into the shallows, triggers plant growth. The dry bakes the land, concentrates animals around remaining water, exposes tubers and root foods.
Every aspect of life, where you camp, what you eat, where you travel, when you gather, when you burn the grass, is calibrated to this cycle. And 65,000 years ago, this cycle is not fixed. The Earth's climate is shifting. Ice ages come and go. Sea levels drop hundreds of meters, exposing vast continental shelves. The monsoon weakens, strengthens, shifts its latitude. The landscape Kael knows is not the landscape his great-grandparents knew, and it is not the landscape his great-grandchildren will know. Adaptability is the word, but it is too clean a word. What the archaeological record at Madjedbebe actually shows is something more specific. These people changed their toolkit, their diet, their settlement patterns, and their resource strategies over and over again across tens of thousands of years in response to environmental conditions that were constantly in flux. They did not do this once, they did it continuously. When the sea level dropped and the coast receded northward, exposing hundreds of kilometers of new land, they adjusted. When the megafauna disappeared, and most of Australia's megafauna was gone by roughly 40,000 years ago, with complex and debated causes including climate change and human hunting pressure, they adjusted. When the last glacial maximum hit, around 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, and the continent became colder, drier, and more arid than at any point in its human history, they adjusted. When the sea rose again at the end of the Ice Age and swallowed the coastal plains, pushing populations inland, they adjusted. The sediment at Madjedbebe records all of this. 3 meters of sand and ash and artifact, and the toolkit changes as you move through it. Different stone types, different flaking techniques, different food residues. The site is not a frozen snapshot, it is a film. A 65,000-year film of human ingenuity under pressure. Kael, in his moment, does not see the film. He sees tonight, tomorrow.
The next season, he knows the landscape will change because his elders have told him stories about change. Stories about floods, about droughts, about animals that are no longer here, about places that are now underwater. These stories are not written down. They are carried in memory, in song, in the structure of ceremony. And some of them, this is not speculation, this is documented. Some of the oral traditions of Aboriginal Australians contain verifiable information about events that happened thousands of years ago. Linguist Nicholas Reed and geographer Patrick Nunn published a 2015 paper documenting Aboriginal oral traditions from multiple coastal communities across Australia that accurately describe post-glacial sea level rise, the flooding of coastal lands that occurred between roughly 12,000 and 7,000 years ago.
These stories, passed down orally through hundreds of generations,
describes specific bays, inlets, and islands that were once dry land, and the descriptions match the known geological and bathymetric record. Reed and Nunn argued that these represent oral traditions with a fidelity of transmission spanning at least 7,000 years, making them among the oldest accurately maintained oral histories in the world. If this is correct, the Aboriginal Australian tradition of knowledge transmission is not merely cultural, it is a technology, a memory technology of extraordinary precision and durability. Kael's elders carry this kind of knowledge. They know things about this landscape that no outsider could learn in a single lifetime. They know which waterholes are permanent and which are seasonal. They know which tubers are toxic until processed and how to process them. They know which trees signal the arrival of certain fish runs, which bird calls indicate the presence of honey, which winds precede the storms. This is not instinct.
This is accumulated, transmitted, tested, refined knowledge, an intellectual tradition as rigorous in its own way as any academic discipline. And none of it is written down. All of it is held in human minds, transmitted through human voices, reinforced through human ceremony. For 65,000 years. Morning. Kael rises before the sun clears the escarpment. The light comes in stages. First, a gray softening of the dark, then a pink flush on the sandstone above, then a sudden blaze of gold as the sun crests the rim. The shelter faces the right direction for morning shade. The sand is cool under his feet. He picks up the hatchet head he ground yesterday. Today, the hafting. He has already selected a handle, a straight branch of a hard, dense wood, about the length of his forearm, trimmed and shaped with a stone flake. At one end, he has split the wood slightly, creating a slot.
He fits the hatchet head into the slot, narrow end first, wedging it tight. Then he wraps the junction with wet sinew, animal tendon, tough and elastic. Over this, he applies a lump of Spinifex resin, a natural adhesive made from the seed pods of Spinifex grass, heated and molded into a workable putty. The resin hardens as it cools, binding the sinew, sealing the joint, locking the head to the handle. This is a composite tool. Stone, wood, sinew, resin, 4 different materials, each processed separately, each contributing a specific property to the finished implement. The stone provides the cutting edge, the wood provides leverage and reach, the sinew provides tensile strength, the resin provides adhesion and waterproofing. This is not a rock picked up and swung at a tree. This is engineering, and the resin deserves its own moment.
Spinifex resin is one of the earliest adhesives in the human archaeological record anywhere in the world. Producing it requires collecting the right plant material, heating it in a controlled way, too much heat and it burns, too little and it does not melt, shaping it while hot, and applying it before it sets. This is a multi-step process that requires planning, material knowledge, and fine motor control. It is, by any reasonable definition, a technology. Kael swings the finished hatchet a few times, testing the balance. The head does not wobble. The resin is set. He walks to a paperbark tree at the edge of the shelter clearing and chops. The edge bites clean. 3 strokes and a slab of bark peels away, exposing the white inner layers. He peels a sheet off. It comes away in a single flexible piece, light and waterproof. This is container material, wrapping material, fuel. The paperbark tree is a hardware store. He chops higher.
There's a dark stain on the trunk, a sign of a sugar bag nest. Native bees, stingless, their honey stored in small wax pots inside a cavity in the wood. He chops around the cavity carefully, opens it, reaches in, his hand comes out dripping. The honey is thin, tangy, less sweet than European bee honey, but calorie-dense and rich in antimicrobial compounds. He eats some, saves the rest in a folded bark container. This is breakfast, not agriculture, not pastoralism. Something different, a deep, specific, practiced knowledge of a particular landscape's resources, accessed through a toolkit designed for exactly these resources, honed over a timescale that dwarfs the entire history of farming. Later in the morning, Kael and two others, a man about his age and an older woman, walked down from the escarpment to the floodplain below. The plain is green, still holding moisture from the last wet season, but it is drying. The grasses are tall and golden at the tips. The paper barks along the creek are thick with birds. They're going to a stand of native grasses, probably something ancestral to the species Risa rufipogon, a wild rice relative, or perhaps panicum species. The older woman knows the stand. She has been harvesting it since she was young. Her mother harvested it, her grandmother. The stand is maintained, not in the way a farmer maintains a field with plowing and planting and irrigation, but in a subtler way. Fire stick farming. The term was coined by archaeologist Rhys Jones in 1969, and it describes the systematic use of landscape burning by Aboriginal Australians to manage vegetation, promote new growth, attract game, maintain travel corridors, and increase the productivity of food plants. It is not farming in the Neolithic sense, but it is not wild foraging either.
It is something in between, a deliberate, sustained, knowledge-intensive management of an entire landscape using fire as the primary tool. The older woman reads the grass. Some of it is ready. The seeds are full and dry, clinging to the stems. She pulls the stalks through her fingers, stripping the seeds into a bark dish. Kael does the same. It is slow work, meditative, but productive. In an hour, they have enough to fill 2 containers. Back at the shelter, the seeds are ground. This is where the grinding stones come in, the same type of artifact found in the deepest layers at Madjedbebe, dated to 65,000 years ago. A flat base stone, a handheld top stone, and the seeds between them. Grind, push, grind. The seeds break down into a coarse flour. Add water, knead, place on hot coals or a heated flat stone. Wait. What comes off the stone is a flatbread, not light and airy, dense, gritty, nutty, but real. Bread
made from wild grass seeds, ground on stone tools, cooked on fire 65,000 years ago. The oldest evidence of seed grinding anywhere in the world. In Europe and the Near East, seed grinding does not appear in the archaeological record until roughly 30,000 years ago at the earliest, with most evidence clustering around 23,000 to 15,000 years ago. At Madjedbebe, it appears at 65,000. This is not a marginal difference. This is a different story of human capability. And yet, here is the thing that makes this story different from every other ancient civilization story I have told. The people at Madjedbebe never transitioned to agriculture. They ground seeds for 65,000 years and never became farmers. They never domesticated the grasses. They never built granaries or irrigation channels. They never developed the surplus and hierarchy cycle that in the Fertile Crescent and the Yellow River Valley and Mesoamerica led to villages, towns, cities, states, empires. Why?
This is one of the most debated questions in Australian archaeology, and the answer is not that they could not. The answer, and this is where the story gets genuinely important for how we think about human history, the answer is that they chose not to. Or more precisely, their system worked. It worked so well for so long across such a vast range of environments that the incentive to switch to agriculture, which, remember, brings with it back-breaking labor, nutritional narrowing, disease, social stratification, and environmental degradation, was simply not there. The Aboriginal Australian economic system was not a failed attempt at agriculture. It was a successful alternative to agriculture.
It was a way of living that sustained human populations on the driest inhabited continent on Earth for 65,000 years without depleting the resource base.
No agricultural civilization on Earth has lasted more than a few thousand years without major collapse or transformation. The Aboriginal system lasted 65,000. That is not a failure. That is the most successful economic system in human history, measured by the only metric that ultimately matters: duration. Kael does not frame it this way. He does not know what agriculture is. He has no concept of an alternative system. He simply lives within a system that works, a system of knowledge, movement, fire, tool use, ceremony, and social obligation that keeps his people fed, sheltered, connected, and meaningful in a landscape they know more intimately than any other people will ever know any other landscape. But I want to hold this point because it matters. For most of the history of Western archaeology, the absence of agriculture in Australia was treated as evidence of primitiveness, a failure to develop, a lag in the march of progress. This attitude was not subtle.
It was used to justify colonization, dispossession, and genocide. The logic was circular and brutal. These people did not farm, therefore they were not civilized, therefore they had no real claim to the land, therefore it was terra nullius, empty land, belonging to no one. The archaeological evidence at Madjedbebe and at sites across Australia demolishes this logic entirely. These were not people who lacked innovation. They invented the ground-edge axe 55,000 years before Europe. They were grinding seeds into flour 40,000 years before the Natufians. They were using reflective pigments for symbolic expression, while Neanderthals were still the only hominins in Europe. They engineered entire landscapes with fire. They maintained oral traditions with verifiable accuracy across millennia. They were not behind, they were playing a different game, and they were winning it. The days at Madjedbebe have a rhythm. Kael knows it without thinking about it, the way you know the rhythm of your own breathing.
Morning is for work that requires light and coolness, toolmaking, foraging, travel. Midday is for rest in the shade of the shelter. Afternoon is for lighter tasks, repairing equipment, processing food, socializing. Evening is for fire, talk, ceremony, story. Today, in the late afternoon, something different. A group arrives from the east, 4 people, 2 men and 2 women carrying bundles. They are kin, related through Kael's mother's line, from a group that ranges along the escarpment country several days' walk away. They have come for an exchange. They bring stone. Specifically, they bring blanks of a fine-grained chert, a cryptocrystalline silica that outcrops in their territory but not in Kael's. This chert is superior to the local sandstone for making certain tools, sharp, predictable in its fracture, capable of holding a finer edge.
Kael's group, in return, offers ochre, high-quality red ochre from a deposit in the escarpment above the shelter, prized for its colour and consistency. This is trade. Not market trade, not currency trade, but embedded exchange. Trade wrapped in kinship, obligation, ceremony and reciprocity. The chert and the ochre change hands as part of a visit that also involves sharing food, exchanging news, arranging a ceremony, and reinforcing the social bonds that connect groups across the landscape. Archaeological evidence for long-distance exchange networks in Aboriginal Australia goes back tens of thousands of years. Specific stone types, shell ornaments and pigments are found hundreds of kilometres from their geological sources, indicating that materials moved across the landscape through chains of exchange that connected communities from coast to interior, from desert to tropical north. These networks were not incidental, they were structural, a fundamental part of the social and economic system maintained over millennia, carrying not just materials, but information,
genetic diversity and cultural innovation. Kael trades.
He receives 4 chert blanks, each about the size of his palm, carefully wrapped in bark. He gives ochre 2 fist-sized lumps in a bark container of pre-ground pigment. The transaction is quiet, almost casual, but there is a formality to it, a specific sequence of words, an acknowledgement of the relationship between the groups, a recognition that this exchange is part of something larger than 2 people handing things to each other. The visitors stay 3 days. On the second night, there is ceremony. I will not describe the ceremony in detail because contemporary Aboriginal communities maintain strict protocols about what can and cannot be shared publicly regarding ceremony, and it would be inappropriate for me to speculate about the specifics of a ceremony 65,000 years ago. What I can say, based on the archaeological evidence, is that ceremony was present. The ochre is there, the grinding stones are there, the reflective mica is there, the fire is there, the people are there.
Whatever was done with these materials in the firelit dark of the shelter, it was done with intention, with knowledge, with a tradition behind it that was already ancient. After the visitors leave, Kael works the chert. It is a different experience from the local sandstone. The chert is harder, more brittle, and fractures with a conchoidal pattern, smooth, curved surfaces like the inside of a seashell. He strikes a flake with a hammerstone. The flake comes off clean, with a sharp edge that could cut skin with no pressure at all. He turns the core, reads the stone. Each strike must follow the natural lines of force within the material, or the core shatters unpredictably. This is not guesswork. This is applied physics, learned through years of practice and instruction. He produces a series of flakes, then selects the best ones.
These he shapes further with pressure flaking, pressing the edge with a pointed tool made of bone or hard wood, removing tiny chips to create a regular, uniform cutting edge. The finished tools are small, sharp, and versatile. Cutting tools, scraping tools, points that can be hafted onto spear shafts. The spear. If the ground edge axe is the signature tool of the earliest Australians, the spear is the weapon. Kael's people hunt with spears, not thrown by hand, but launched with a spear thrower, or woomera, a device that effectively extends the arm and multiplies the throwing force. The woomera is another Australian innovation, one of the earliest mechanical advantage tools in the human record. A spear thrown by hand might travel 30 meters with accuracy. A spear thrown with a woomera can travel 70 or 80 meters with enough force to penetrate the hide of a large animal.
Kael does not have a woomera. At 65,000 years ago, the archaeological evidence for spear throwers is not clear, and they may have developed later. But he has spears, and the chert points will tip them. He works quickly, efficiently. By evening, he has 4 points ready for hafting. The fire that night is large. Someone has dragged a dead trunk close and fed one end into the flames. It will burn all night, the log pushed further in as the end is consumed. The children are asleep. The adults sit close, faces lit from below, shadows huge on the rock wall behind them. Kael looks up at the ceiling of the shelter. In the flickering light, the soot stains look like clouds. The rock itself is pockmarked, weathered, ancient beyond comprehension, a billion years of geological time compressed into a few meters of sandstone overhead.
Somewhere in the layers above, water is seeping, slowly, through cracks and pores, dissolving and redepositing minerals in a process that will continue long after every person alive tonight is dust. He does not think about geological time, he thinks about the rain. The wet season is coming. He can feel it in the humidity, see it in the building of thunderheads to the north each afternoon, hear it in the changing calls of the birds. When the rain comes, the floodplain below will transform, the dry grass will vanish underwater, fish will pour into the shallows, the magpie geese will arrive in thousands, the long barramundi runs will begin. Life will become briefly abundant, almost beyond measure, and then the dry will return, and the water will retreat, and the strategy will shift again. Move to the permanent water holes. Hunt the animals concentrated there. Dig for tubers. Process seeds. Wait.
This cycle, wet and dry, plenty and scarcity, expansion and contraction, is the heartbeat of life at Madjedbebe, and it has been beating for 65,000 years.
I want to jump forward. Not 65,000 years. That is too much, too fast. Let me jump 5,000 years. Kael is gone. His children's 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 children, uncountable generations down the line, are still at Madjedbebe. The shelter looks the same. The escarpment looks the same. The fire pit has moved slightly, a few meters to the left where the smoke drafts better. The sand floor has risen a few centimeters, layered with new ash, new flakes, new ochre dust. The tools are different. Not radically, the ground edge axe persists, barely changed, but the flaked tools show new techniques, different retouch patterns, slightly different raw materials as trade networks shift and new outcrops are discovered. The diet is similar, but not identical. Some of the megafauna are gone, the largest species are disappearing, and the hunting strategies are adapting to smaller, faster prey. Jump again, 10,000 years, 20. The last glacial maximum is approaching. The world is cooling, sea levels are dropping. The coast is now so far away that it is barely relevant to the people at Madjedbebe. The landscape is drier, the monsoon is weaker. Some of the plant species that thrived in wetter times are retreating to sheltered gorges. The people adapt. They range more widely. They spend more time at the permanent water sources. They process more seeds, more tubers, fallback foods that require more labor but are reliably available. Jump again. 40,000 years. The ice age is ending. The sea is rising. The land that was once dry savanna is flooding. The coast is marching south, swallowing the plains that Kael's distant ancestors walked when they first arrived on the continent. Communities that lived on the coast are being pushed inland. Population pressure increases in the escarpment country. New groups appear. Trade networks reconfigure. The toolkit changes again. Jump 50,000 years, 60. The layers are deep now, 3 meters of sand and story.
And at the bottom, Kael's axe, ground smooth, stained with use, sitting in the red sand exactly where he set it down on that afternoon 65,000 years ago, when the edge was finally sharp enough. It will sit there for another few thousand years, until 1973, when the first archaeological excavations at the site, then called Malakunanja II, are conducted by Johan Kaminga and colleagues. They find deep cultural deposits. They find edge-ground axes. They find ochre. The dates they get are old, very old. But the dating technology of the time cannot resolve the bottom layers precisely. The site is recognized as important, but not yet understood. It is not until 2012, when Chris Clarkson's team begins new excavations with modern dating techniques, that the full depth of the site becomes clear.
The 2017 Nature paper lands like a depth charge in the archaeological community. 65,000 years, the oldest confirmed site of human habitation in Australia, possibly the oldest outside Africa. And the tools are the real shock, because they are not crude, they are not primitive. They are sophisticated, varied, and indicative of a people who arrived on this continent already possessing a complex technological repertoire, who had been innovating for a long time before they ever reached these shores. This means the journey itself, the migration from Africa through South and Southeast Asia, across the water gaps of Wallacea, the island chain between the Asian and Australian continental shelves, and onto the shores of Sahul, was not undertaken by marginal, barely surviving groups of wanderers. It was undertaken by competent, knowledgeable, technologically equipped people who could navigate open water, read unfamiliar landscapes, and establish viable communities in entirely new environments.
The water crossings alone are staggering. Even at the lowest sea levels of the last glacial period, the crossing from the Asian continental shelf, Sunda, to the Australian continental shelf, Sahul, required multiple open ocean voyages. The shortest routes still involved crossings of 60 to 90 kilometers of open water, out of sight of land. This is, as far as we know, the earliest evidence of deliberate maritime voyaging in human history. These people built watercraft, rafts, boats, something, 65,000 years ago and sailed into the unknown. Kael's ancestors were sailors. They were navigators. They watched the stars and the currents and the birds, and they got on the water and they went. Not because they were driven by desperation. The evidence suggests that Southeast Asian populations were thriving, but because something in them said go. And they went, and they stayed for 65,000 years. I want to return to the shelter one last time, not to Kael's time, to now.
Madjedbebe today is in the care of the Mirar people, who are the traditional owners of this country. The site sits within the Jabaluka mineral lease area, adjacent to the Ranger uranium mine in Kakadu National Park. The Mirar have fought long and hard against mining in their country, and their struggle is one of the most significant indigenous land rights campaigns in Australian history. The rock shelter looks much as it has for millennia. The sandstone overhang, the sandy floor, the soot-stained ceiling, the escarpment rising above. It is not a tourist site. It is not easy to access. It is, in many ways, an unremarkable piece of landscape, unless you know what lies beneath your feet. 3 meters of sand, 11,000 artifacts in the deepest layer alone, edge-ground axes, grinding stones, ochre, mica, points, flakes, resin, ash, the material record of 65,000 years of human life. The oldest continuous cultural presence anywhere on Earth outside Africa. The Mirar know this. They have always known this. Not in archaeological terms, not with radiocarbon dates and luminescence readings, but in the way that people know the place they come from. This is their country. It has always been their country. The archaeology confirms what the Mirar never needed confirmed, but the confirmation matters to the rest of us. Because the story of Madjedbebe is not just an Australian story, it is a human story. It is the story of what our species is capable of when given enough time and enough respect for the land that sustains it. 65,000 years. The pyramids are 4,500 years old. Stonehenge is 5,000. The oldest known agriculture is about 12,000. The oldest known cities are about 9,000.
The entire span of what we conventionally call civilization, from the first mud brick temples of Mesopotamia to this sentence you are hearing right now, fits inside the last 6% of the time that people have been living at Madjedbebe. 6%. 94% of the human history of this place happened before anyone, anywhere, planted a seed in a furrow, or stacked a brick on a brick, or wrote a single word. And during all that time, all 65,000 years of it, the people at Madjedbebe were not waiting. They were not stagnating. They were not failing to develop. They were living. They were innovating. They were adapting. They were grinding axes and painting bodies and singing songs and navigating a landscape of staggering complexity with a depth of knowledge that no written tradition has ever matched. They were, by any honest measure, among the most successful human populations that have ever lived. And they did it without writing, without metal, without agriculture, without cities, without any of the things that Western civilization has insisted are the markers of advancement. They did it with stone and fire and knowledge and time. 65,000 years of time. And the shelter is still there. The escarpment is still there. The Mirar are still there. The soot on the ceiling is still there. The ochre dust in the sand is still there. The oldest home in Australia, still standing, still known, still cared for. 65,000 years and counting.